A Lost Button from Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last they went home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here is your button," cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button was white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. Did you lose a button?" "I found one." "That's not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button had 4 holes." Toad put the button with the 2 holes in his pocket. They walked back to the woods and looked at the dark paths. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came from behind a tree. "I heard that you were looking for a button," he said. "Here is one that I just found." "That is not my button," said Toad. "The button was square." "My button was round." Toad put the square button into his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button is thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There, on the floor, he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." Toad took all the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and he jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. That is the end of this story. Arnold Lobel is the author. Arnold Lobel was often sick and missed many days of school when he was young. When he went back to school, he made friends by telling stories and drawing pictures. Many years later, his children liked to catch frogs and toads. He loved the animals and wrote about them in his Frog and Toad stories. So that was about the author. This next part, the author's purpose, it tells us why he wrote the story. Arnold Lobel wanted to write about good friends. Write about your friend. Tell how you help each other. So if you look in your reading and writing companion, there is a graph in there where you can use your own words to retell the story. And then you need to write about that.
What just happened?